All of a sudden, the lead surgeon straightened up and goes, "What the heck is that?"
And I noticed they wanted to dress up Miss Barbie, and she was going to marry Ken, and they were going to get married. I wasn't feeling that. My Barbie was a female version of Rambo. An old girl meant business.
We got ready to go. One guy grabbed me, threw me to the ground. The rest of the company bolted. The guy who grabbed me was the fastest one in the company, and I was pretty fast at the time.
The boss needed someone to recover the vehicle. When we got there, I saw the NGS on its side, and I began to see the extent of how you died.
Bill Wadford was working as a nurse with the 5th MASH unit in 1989 when he got the call to deploy for Operation Just Cause. In a matter of hours, he went from operating room at Womack Army Hospital to a surgical tent at the end of a runway in Panama, waiting for combat wounded to roll in. Bill Wadford.
Hi, y'all. In my den, there's a chest. It's made out of solid oak. It was handmade for me by my grandfather. It was intended for me to store my toys as a child. I still have that box, but over the years, it became a storage place for memos and letters and after-action reviews, newspaper articles, magazines, magazine stories, for things that dealt with Forward Surgical Team, the invasion of Panama, and Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Unintentionally, it became somewhat of a metaphor for placing emotions I didn't want to deal with at the time away. I knew they were there, but I just didn't choose to deal with them for many decades. A little bit of background on how I got to Panama and over in Desert Shield and Desert Storm. I graduated from high school in 1969. I immediately went to NC State, where I stayed for about a year and a half, amassing a grade point of 0.7. Yeah. Well, after a year and a half, NC State asked me to take my academic endeavors elsewhere. For those of you that were around, Vietnam was going hot and heavy in 69 and 70. I had a very low draft number, and it wasn't a matter of if I was going to be drafted, it was only a matter of when I was going to be drafted. So I'd been talking to the Air Force, and in January of 1971, I went on active duty, went through my basic training, went to tech school to become a helicopter mechanic. They sent me up to Fairchild Air Force Base in Spokane, Washington, and I worked with a pararescue unit there. Well, our unit did a lot of things, and one of the things we did was to do what Life Flight does now all across the nation. I had worked my way up to becoming an aircrew member, and we would go out to accident sites, and we would pick up the injured person, and we would take them back to a hospital. Well, I worked with the pararescue guys, and what they did to ease the pain and suffering of these accident victims was just tremendously cool, and that always stuck in my mind. When I got out of my enlistment for the Air Force, I knew I wanted to go back and get my college degree, so I went to Washington State, and I had chosen nursing as my career field. I graduated from Washington State with a Bachelor of Science and a 3.5 GPA. So it's amazing how easier it gets when you're really interested in what you're doing. My senior year, the recruiters came around, and I decided I wanted to go in the Army. I wanted to go back into military service. And I wanted the operating room to be my area of emphasis. So I went back in. I was trained by the Army, And I worked in community hospitals, I worked in large medical centers, I worked in field hospitals. And in 1987, I got my dream job. I came to Fort Bragg, and I was assigned to the 5th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital right here in Fayetteville. At the same time, in the same time frame, the 44th Med Brigade was working on an innovative, totally exciting concept called forward surgical teams. Forward surgical teams are highly mobile. They pack a lot of intensive equipment and highly skilled people in a very rapidly deployable package. So I got lucky and I got involved right on the ground floor. At that time, there were maybe 60 of us in the entire Army that believed in this concept. But all 60 of us were true believers. And like true believers, we were very zealous in our support and very vocal in our support. We would go anywhere. We would do slideshows, we would set up our tents, we would do presentations, we would do briefings to anybody that would actually give us a few minutes of their time and listen to our spiel. There were 2 FSTs developed. One was airborne capable, and the other was capable of being deployed in 2 deuce-and-a-half trucks or 1 C-130 airplane. When we looked at equipment, we looked at stuff that was lightweight, small, had multiple functions, and it was something that packed a lot of bang for the buck. We used things like toaster-sized ProPack vital signs monitors, crockpot-sized British draw-over anesthesia units. We used oxygen concentrators, which were about suitcase size, and that freed us up from having to carry those great big green metal oxygen tanks. We used liquid sterilization instead of steam sterilization, so we didn't have to lug around those great big steam sterilizers and all the water that it takes to operate those things. We used also some low-tech stuff. Rather than the shelters and tentage that was available in the larger medical units, we used a simple GP canvas tent to house all of our operations. As we were going along and we were demonstrating our capabilities, we came to the attention of the special ops community on Fort Bragg. And they felt, I assume they felt, that we occupied a niche between their very robust, very dynamic initial insertion package and a later arriving larger medical unit. The FSTs fit right in the middle just perfectly. So at dark 30 on the morning of December 19th, 1989, the Forward Surgical Team and myself found ourselves in the dimly red-lit interior of a C-141 Air Force cargo plane headed to the Republic of Panama. We'd been flying for several hours, and the intercom crackled, and the pilot came over and he said, "I am beginning my combat descent into Howard Air Force Base." And almost immediately, he knows that sucker into about a 45-degree down angle, and down we went. Well, Bill, our nurse anesthetist, asked, nobody in particular, "Do you think there are any aircraft guns can reach us up here?" Well, out of the gloom came about 3 or 4 responsive, "Shut the hell up, Bill." But we made it down safely. And as the sun came up over Howard Air Force Base, we were set up and we were operational and ready to go for the invasion that was supposed to start at 0100 the next day. I was scrubbed in on one of the first cases, and I was trying my best to keep up passing instruments to 2 really crackerjack surgeons. We were operating on a young man that had had multiple fragment wounds to his abdomen from a grenade explosion. All of a sudden, the lead surgeon straightened up and goes, "What the heck is that?" We looked into the young man's belly, and the second surgeon said, "They're freaking watermelon seeds." And there's more coming out. So we all got a big laugh out of that. And then we proceeded to sew up the multiple holes in this young man's intestine to stop the great seed escape. We cleaned up also the ones that had dropped out previously. The young man did fine, went on, had a great war story to tell. In combat, at least the part that I saw, the casualties don't come in a steady stream. They come in ebbs and flows, and depending on the intensity of the combat operations, we would see the wounded an hour or so later. I remember one fella in particular. His unit had been ambushed by the PDF. 4 of his unit had been killed. 9 had been wounded, several grievously, including this young man. We got him on our OR table, and we worked on him feverishly for several hours. But unfortunately, we couldn't save him. We were crushed. I mean, literally crushed. But there's other wounded out there that need us to take care of them. So we quite literally wiped the tears out of our eyes, took out our mental box, our mental box with little compartments in it, and we took that crush and that frustration, and we put it in one of the boxes, one of the drawers. We closed the drawer, closed up the box, took a deep breath, and we went on and we took care of the rest of the wounded. I imagine that civilians go through a similar experience when they're taking care of mass casualty situations like the recent Las Vegas shooting. You have to become professionally detached. You have to open your box, you have to open the drawer, you have to put your emotions inside and you close it, because you don't want your emotions to impair your judgment or your physical skills. There's a meme that floats around Veterans Day on social media that goes something like this. A veteran is someone who at some point in their life has written a blank check to the United States of America for up to and including our lives. This creates a bond and a comradeship amongst members of the military, and it's a bond that I think transcends what the civilians experience. I kept that box closed for decades, literally decades. I couldn't tell that story I just told you without breaking up. And I couldn't continue the story. The first time I finished that story is when I was talking to Jeff, our storytelling coach. So I've been able to take both that literal box that's in my den and my mental box, and I've been able to gingerly open them, and I've been able to look at some of the items inside. I can tell the story of the young man now without breaking up, and I can smile a little bit because I remember all of the lives that we did save and all of the lives that have been saved by forward surgical teams throughout the Army over the decades. And I don't dwell so much on the one fellow that we lost. Thank you.